Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast. Here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have another developer interview lined up for this week's episode. And as always, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game, or just want to talk shop with me, I am always looking for guests. So feel free to reach out. My guest this week is a sole developer working on their first game, Barely Delivered. And we're going to be talking about it, kind of learning game dev as you're making it, and what it's also like to be a new developer working with Godot. So please welcome to the cast, Justin Hartman. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm glad to be here. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I working on kind of my first big game, first Steam release, kind of as a solo dev. I have a little bit of background from like high school, as when I first had my experience making a game. Me and a friend made like a 2D platformer. And we actually ran a Kickstarter for it back then and raised $1,000, which was pretty cool at the time. But we just released it on like Itch and used Game Maker and just kind of learning how to make games. And then went to college for computer science and learned a lot more about programming and kind of delved into some other hobbies like music. Got a bunch of stuff in the background. But then kind of came back to game dev. I just feel like it was a itch that I needed to scratch. So it kind of lined up perfectly with like the Godot engine kind of coming into full form, and yeah, here I am trying to make another game. So yeah, glad to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's always great to chat with developers like kind of work on their first game, and also just like again, like for people watching, we talk a lot about indie games here on the channel, so it's always great to see what else is coming up next in the space. So,
Yeah,
to get things started, Justin, since this is your first time on the cast, could you talk? You already kind of went a little bit about your background, but could you talk a little bit about what kind of game you're making? Like, kind of give us like the elevator pitch.
yeah. So barely delivered is an idea that I came up with. My girlfriend actually came up with the initial idea of like, what if there was a game where you delivered packages as a bear? So that's kind of the one sentence description of the game, but I kind of took that idea and ran with it. It's a 3D arcade style physics adventure game is what I kind of describe it as, where you go around your neighborhood that where you deliver packages of various sizes. You either deliver by foot or within the car, and you can crash into other vehicles. You know, play with the environment. There's a lot of other things going on within the game itself that you can kind of interact with within the world. But that's kind of the base idea, is that you're racing against the clock, or you're trying to deliver all the packages to certain houses within a certain level and progress through the campaign. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you said this is also kind of like your first like full game that you're working on after trying to make a platformer. So
Yep.
I guess like one question I always like to ask like new developers. I guess what attracted you to like this idea to kind of like
Yeah.
build as your first game as opposed I'm sure you've had plenty of other ideas when it comes
Right.
to game dev.
Yeah, I've had a various like set of demos in the past where like I played around with, like in Godot, I tried to make like a soccer game at one point, and then that quickly fizzled out, and like tried to make another kind of like mobile platformer at one point, and nothing just kind of stuck after like a couple weeks of working on it. Like it just didn't feel right, or like I kind of lost the interest for it, I guess. But I feel like the as I keep working on this game, the more I enjoy playing it and like actually like being like involved with it. So I think that's kind of been the motivating factor for me, is like, I don't know, also learning the Godot engine in general, since I'm like you said, kind of a first time dev in a while at least. So kind of learning a brand new engine and learning a lot of things about like procedurally generating the neighborhood or that you're running around in, or like working with physics and like that kind of stuff. So it's all pretty new to me. Like my first game was like 2D, did a lot of 2D stuff. So diving into the 3D world, I think, is what really kind of attracted me to this idea and making this game. And yeah, I've been kind of working on it over the past couple of years in my spare time when I can, but we're starting to really ramp up now and hopefully releasing sometime this year.
Hmm. And speaking about procedural generation, that's always a fun thing. Again, I've spoken
Yeah,
to a lot of developers, both new and veterans, and trying to
yeah,
learn or get your head around making something proc gen is its
right.
own very unique challenge.
Yeah, it's gone through phases throughout the game. Like it's kind of the core, I guess, foundational pieces or one of them that has been there since the start because I knew like if I wanted to make this in a fun and exciting way, balancing some like handmade pieces with like the procedural generation to make it feel natural and not just like a cookie cutter like neighborhood every time. So it's definitely been a challenge. I kind of settled with I don't know if you're familiar with any like the procedural generation algorithms, but I'm using like a modified version of like the wave function collapse where you've got a set of tiles where you start with like you kind of give it an input map of like this is what I want a neighborhood to look like, and then it kind of spits out a version of that in some
Hmm.
way. So that kind of gives me a little more control of like this is where the city's gonna be, but then as you get further away, that's like more sparse, less houses, less
Hmm.
tree or more trees. So that's been fun and like has made it really cool. And I think at some point it'd be nice to maybe release that as like a open tool set for Godot. Like it's pretty big in the community to like have free tools since it's a
Hmm.
free open source engine. So maybe doing the same with that tool because I do find it pretty useful and maybe other devs might also find use out of it.
Hmm. And speaking about like using a Godot for the first time, again, like as everyone watching this knows, like 2023 was definitely a year where a lot of major shakeups happened, especially with the whole Unity thing. And we've
Yeah.
been hearing more and more developers switching to Godot, either being first timers like you, or people who've like used Unity or Unreal for years, and then as more announcements or more buzz around it, they've been switching to it. So, as a first-time developer, I just want to ask you, what has been like kind of like your overall opinions of using Godot for like game dev or just like general use as well?
Yeah. Well, to give a little background on my own experience, so that initial platform I made was in Game Maker, so that's kind of like an all 2D engine.
Hmm.
Um, pretty. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, so it's kind of hard for me to judge if Game Maker was a great engine or not. I've used Unity for a couple like little projects that never kind of went anywhere. I've used Unreal once or twice. I will say Godot in terms of like just even like the engine size itself, like it's super fast to boot up. Like one of the problems I had with Unity and Unreal is that they're very large. Just like the engine itself is very large in file size, so just kind of booting up and trying to keep the space open on your computer, it's way more resource intensive, I think, even for small things. So that's been one thing that's really nice is that Godot seems super light, super portable in terms of like I can work on my laptop if I want to, and then switch over to my more powerful PC, and that is pretty nice. And then just in terms of like how things are structured within it, kind of makes more sense to me than Unity. Unity's all about like game objects and there's like different classes of like they use like the entity component system. I don't know if you're familiar, but that's kind of the Unity philosophy. Godot, everything's a node, so like you can have the game controller node and then a main menu, and then you have all your buttons as nodes within the main menu or whatever. So it just kind of makes sense from like a hierarchical like kind of organizing things, at least for me. And it's been great so far, and like the community's great in terms of finding solutions for stuff. I'm in the Godot Discord, and that's been super helpful for getting questions answers pretty quickly. So yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot.
Hmm. And how long have you been working on Barely Delivered for?
I think I just crossed 2 years in December, so I feel kind of like I was ahead of the curve in like Godot's popularity because everyone was switching over when Unity kind of had their thing this past year. So, but yeah, it's been 2 years so far.
Hmm. And I'm looking on the store page for it. So, as you said, like kind of like the main focus of this is that you're a bear delivering packages all around. The neighborhoods are procedurally generated. So,
Yeah.
what else is going on in the game itself? Like, what else is the player going to be doing besides like just driving around?
Right. One thing I'm currently working on and haven't really fully fleshed it out yet in terms of how expansive it's going to be, but like there's a little clip in the trailer there on Steam of like character customization. So I think having some kind of element of that where you can like customize your character to whatever you want it to be, your vehicle you're going to upgrade over time. Like I think the story's going to start with you delivering newspapers with like a bicycle, and then kind of work your way up to like full on mailman where you've got your own van and throwing packages out the window. So that is kind of like the main core function. I think there could potentially be like side quests along the way and stuff, but I see it more of as like kind of like the repeatable arcade style game where you have your one objective and you're trying to, make it happen. And then obviously I'm working on, making more NPCs and stuff. You'll see like in the trailers a lot of cars right now, but adding stuff like buses or like maybe even like I don't know, something that's trying to deter you in some way from delivering packages would be kind of fun. So it's just stuff I'm playing around with right now. But yeah, that's kind of the core idea, I guess.
Hmm. And like making like an arcade style game is one thing that I always find very challenging for a lot of developers because there's that definitely that risk of how much or how little you put into a game.
Right.
And the challenge when it comes to arcade games is that they're oftentimes very limited in terms of like I guess like length or the amount of gameplay you get out of them because they're meant to be replayed again and again and again, like a Devil Daggers or last year with Killbug.
Yeah.
And with Barely Delivered, in terms of I guess like trying to figure out like what you want the game loop to be as a first time
Right.
developer, like how did you settle on again what you're expecting the player to be doing for a 10-minute run, a 20-minute
Right.
run, or whatever.
Yeah. I think it's just been in my own experiences of playing like I don't want to throw out the term that Barely Delivered's like a roguelike, but just that kind of like gameplay loop of like you can sit down for 20, 30 minutes and kind of get the full experience if you want to, and then making the mechanics in a way where it's easy to, start but hard to master is kind of the philosophy I'm trying to go with. So people can easily pick this game up, hopefully, and, share it with friends. And then it's kind of like an easy barrier of access or barrier of entry. But then for the people that are really into it, you can really kind of hone the craft of throwing packages or like figuring out certain routes that are easier to take or, try to make it in a way where there are levels to how advanced you want to get with it. And that can also come with like the progress, like having like a star level for each level or something. Like if you didn't do it perfectly, you could try to restart that one and like really try to figure out how you're gonna go about making that route. So, but that's something I'm open to feedback to. I don't know if they're like you mentioned. That is a struggle for arcade games. So if there's anything you've seen, like I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on like what a good arcade style game like what you're looking for at least.
I think for me, the issue that I have with arcade style games is that they're oftentimes very much built on like perfect optimization. That there
Yeah.
is no, I guess, like room for improvisation or variance. Like
Right.
I know there's a lot of people, and I'm sure, like in the comments down below, I have quite a few fans of like Devil Daggers, and I forget the name of the sequel. I think it came out in 22 or 23. But the issue for me is that when it gets to like that level of optimization, where if you know exactly where every single enemy is going to spawn, then you know exactly where to shoot your bullet or move over here. It just becomes like an exercise of how do I just make this as optimized as possible? And then it doesn't feel like you're really playing the game. It just feels like
Right.
you're having like this overall grand plan. And
Right.
I think that also stems to what I really like about kind of what we're seeing with more of the evolution of like first person shooters over the last like 6-7 years, with like the likes of Doom Eternal, Ultra Kill, where they're becoming more and more kind of like action focused. So there's a lot more you're doing, but at the same time, it means that you can't really go into anything with like a set plan. And I've spoken to a lot of developers, so I've heard from people who play like a lot of like action driven or very like flow driven games, like
Yeah.
Hotline Miami, and it's definitely become a very like I think interesting parallel between the people who really like a Doom Eternal or an Ultra Kill where there is complete variance. Like you cannot go into any encounter and be like, okay, if I just do this, this, and this, I'm gonna win every time.
Yeah.
Versus people who like an arcade style or Hotline Miami where it's kind of like I can just kind of like turn off my brain and I'm just gonna like do like a just get like this perfect flow state of
Yeah.
okay, run here, turn, shoot this guy, go over here, throw this, go over here, grab this ammo, and it becomes like almost like a performance in terms of that level. So I
Yeah.
guess like what do you think about that in terms of kind of like improvisation versus performance in that way?
Yeah. I think I don't know. I think with I've know exactly what you're talking about, and like when I replay levels currently, when I'm like testing out Barely Delivered, like there I'm trying to really strike a balance between that in some ways. Like I like the idea of like if you screw up on a level, then you can kind of restart and like figure out okay, well, what can I do better this time. But I also like you said, throwing in some variance in there where like it's not always predictable. Like the one that kind of I think of as like Overcooked. I don't know if you're ever played it a lot or but
Oh yes.
like um there is a set level, there are set like recipes that you're doing for that level, but it's not like you're not getting them in the same order every time.
Yeah.
There could be stuff going wrong, like it just kind of like devolves into chaos every time, just because of the nature of the game. So that's kind of the I don't know, one of my bigger inspirations with making this is like a game like Overcooked where yes, you have some certain control over like the mechanics and you can get better at the mechanics, but also I don't know, I don't want to make it to where it feels like the same level every single time you play it. So
Hmm.
throwing in kind of random variants of some kind to where like it always is feeling fresh no matter like when you pick it up. So yeah.
Hmm. And I think to that point, that is also I think one of the things that separates kind of like the pure arcade games from the ones that kind of require you to have like that kind of like active engagement,
Yeah.
where you know that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. You just don't know when or where X, Y,
Right.
and Z is going to happen in an individual level. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and to me, I think again, like I prefer like those kinds of games. And yes, for people watching this, we did co-op Overcooked. I think we did most of the first game. We did I think half to three quarters of the second game. And yeah, like that, it's a very crazy in terms of its design. And again, like that's part of that appeal, where it's kind of like that kind of controlled chaos that you're
Right.
trying to manage.
Yeah, and that's kind of the I guess the energy I'm trying to bring into Barely Delivered a little bit is where you can have a certain control over your vehicle and what you're doing, but hopefully there's like enough going on in the world to where you're like, all right, I'm just gonna try my best here, and what happens happens. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think yeah, Overcooked has definitely been one of my bigger inspirations like going into this project.
Hmm. In terms of, I guess, like the complexity or the difficulty of a barely delivered, this is another thing that it's always a very interesting conversation I have with developers. I guess how are you approaching, I guess, the audience for a game
Right.
like this? Because again, things have certainly they change like almost like month by month these days in terms of what people are looking at, who's trying to appeal to what, etc., etc.
Right. Um I don't know. I think it's interesting because like I feel like this philosophy is kind of or different games take different philosophies of this. Like a Dark Souls doesn't hold your hand throughout the game and it's going to punish you and you're just going to have to like figure it out. And some people love that. And then I feel like there's a kind of this newer wave of indie devs that I've seen at least that kind of let you if you want to just make it like super easy, which I think is I kind of like that idea honestly from a at least from a user perspective. Like if you want a challenge then you can play Dark Souls, but I don't think like there should be a high barrier of entry for Barely Delivered. Like it's a pretty cutesy game for the most part. Like I don't want somebody to pick it up and then just be super frustrated because it's just like way too difficult. So you can kind of manage some of that with like having a, whatever your base difficulty is, and then having accessibility features within the settings. Like maybe you make it to where they can't fully wreck their vehicle or something, or they can pass through other cars and like they don't get wrecked by other NPCs and stuff. So those are some ideas I'm playing around with. I haven't really done like a deep like haven't fully fleshed it out yet in terms of like the accessibility features, but
Mhm.
I remember seeing like I can't remember if it's just called the Crab Game on Twitter. What one of those there was like an indie game where it's like basically you're playing as a crab, but they recently did their beta testing where one of the accessibility features you could just bring out a huge gun and just kill an enemy with one bullet, rather than having to actually like play and use some of the other weapons. So I thought that was interesting, and like solutions like that are kind of fun. What maybe like I have it to where if you want the packages could like auto lock to the targets rather than you having to actually aim or something.
Mhm.
So just some ideas I've kind of thought about, but definitely want to make people feel like that it's not just super difficult right off the bat to where they can't play the game or have an enjoyable experience. But yeah, so it's that with the other conversation about like variance versus like a optimized route. I think some kind of balance is what I'm going for. At least I'm not really trying to make it super difficult for anyone. So yeah.
Mhm. Now, another point I want to ask you about, Justin, with the aesthetics of the game, like this is again something for any developer. New World, they always have that challenge of what they want the look and the feel of it to be. I'm
Yeah.
looking at the store page for it. In terms of like kind of like your overall like aesthetics or where you want the game to go, I guess what has been kind of like your thought process on building like the aesthetics or the look of it?
Yeah, and this is one that has been a struggle for me
Mhm.
personally. I come from like a coding background, and like my day job is like a software engineer. So I'm very software focused, but I think game
Mhm.
development has kind of been my outlet for more creative stuff like doing the 3D modeling and like making the music for the game and stuff. So aesthetics were one where I kind of really had to shape it as I went. Like, you start with like the kind of default circles and rectangles and make it
Mhm.
work and like just kind of get a working prototype. But I've kind of refined the models like a couple different times, like had different versions of the houses and like just really trying to find like the right style. Like the bear itself has changed multiple times. Like it had like a almost like a teddy bear look at one point, and now it's kind of more of like a um just kind of like a singular blob that I don't know how to really describe it, but definitely like a little more unique than what initially was. So I don't know if there's any one thing driving my aesthetic look of it. I think, trying to make it feel like a cozy, like rounded edges kind of look where um, it feels like, I don't know, like it's not super grating in any way. Like try to go with like a colorful palette. And I don't know, like I said, I think Overcooked was a big inspiration. Games like Animal Crossing also kind of like that look of where everything's kind of this rounded, cute look to it is kind of the um I guess the idea I was going for, or like maybe subconsciously was referencing. So yeah, I don't know what if I have like a real like aesthetic I'm really trying to achieve, but I think that's when I look at the game, that's what I think of at least. So yeah.
Mhm. And yeah, like getting the look of a game for any developer is definitely one of those struggles that I have seen many times over because it is something that, like, I do a lot of store page reviews here. I've been trying to fill more in of any games and trying to get that kind of like first appearance of your game to look good is very difficult for, again, like not only for any sole developers but for any teams. Like if you're not
Right.
familiar with both, like if you don't have a really solid art background, if you don't have a really solid marketing background, it can be
Right.
very hard to like get someone to be like, oh, this game looks interesting, let me actually look at the rest of the store page.
Right. Yeah, and that's one thing that I feel like is going to be the biggest challenge for me personally, and that's
Hmm.
why one of my friends Austin has been helping a lot with like doing some marketing. He's got more of
Yeah.
a marketing sales background, so he's the one really kind of pushing like us posting on social media and stuff. And that's kind of one thing I wanted to ask you about, since I feel like I would consider you more of an expert than me on like the current like indie game scene and how just what the current trends are. So what are your thoughts on like, what have you seen that's successful in like current indie game marketing? Because I kind of have this idea of my head at least a few years ago of what worked and what didn't, but I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are in 2024 now of
Yeah.
like how an indie game can market themselves successfully.
I think the biggest thing is really getting a fantastic GIF of your game. Getting, like, if you can perfectly encapsulate, like, the most weirdest, most out there, most oh my god moment of your game in, like, a 2 to 5 second clip, that can do a lot of numbers when it comes to social media. And, like, one of the big things, like, right now as we're recording this, I'm finishing on my book I'm writing on a shooter design. And one of the things, like, for a lot of FPSs, especially over, like, the last 4 or 5 years, has just been having one GIF of something crazy. Like, hey, my gun... I remember, like, one thing that blew up on Twitter for, like, a brief time was like, hey, this gun shoots office spaces. Like, you shoot the gun and it creates, like, a fully functional cubicle. Like, just like that. And, like, that was it. Like, I don't even think there was, like, even, like, a game where, like, if that was actually part of it, was just... They were just like, yeah, I was messing around. I made a gun that makes cubicles. And people were like, oh my god. And they started to follow it. And I think this is one advantage, and like to what you were just saying, like one of the big challenges when it comes to like marketing is that there is a fundamental difference between how you market an action game versus an RPG versus a abstracted game, puzzle game, casual game, hardcore game, and it is notoriously difficult. And yeah, I could use some marketing advice for myself how to market this channel more. But
right.
I think for like indie games in particular, it really is about trying to show off as quickly and as efficiently as you can what makes this game special. What like as another point, we're recording this right now where that game Power World just released to like insane levels of success. And their whole thing was just like, here's some Pokemon looking characters. They have guns.
Yeah.
And that was like enough to kind of like start that explosion. But it is, again, unfortunately, like when it comes to indie games, especially like for like smaller developers and smaller studios who either you don't have that budget to go, let's make the super 4K, over the top trailer, or your game is just not that bombastic. And again, like saying like if I were to say like if someone's watching who's working on a match 3 game or a turn-based strategy game, me saying make a bombastic GIF of your game, it doesn't really work that way when the whole gameplay is just, here's these guys on the left, here's these guys on the right, and then they just, go at it like that. And unfortunately, marketing is always like the nail in the coffin for a lot of developers because it's so hard to get someone interested in your game. I would say like another piece of advice, if there's any festivals coming up on Steam, either they're like hosted exclusively by Valve, like they're like a Next Fest, or if there's any like indie ones that have anything in relation to your game, try your damnedest to get on there. Because one of the best things, like to your point about like trends in indie development or indie marketing, festivals have been, I think, one of the biggest sources in the last like 3 to 4 years. This idea that all these games can come together and they can have like their own, front and center on Steam saying, hey, look at all these games, look at all this stuff. Do you like this kind of genre? Well, here's all these games for you. Like, it's that kind of marketing that is really effective, in my opinion, in terms of getting eyes on smaller games. Because as a smaller developer, you're never going to be able to say, well, let me just turn on my marketing team and we'll drum up a effective social media campaign for TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. But if there's a really solid festival going on, again, there's Puzzle Fest, I'm pretty sure what was like there's Little Narracon, I'm pretty sure there is a festival for like casual or wholesome games. I think they've even had that a few years. Like
Yeah.
getting onto those, and most importantly, again, like this is not just to you, but to anyone watching this. If you're going on a festival, make sure your game is on point. Like, do not put like a rush prototype. Do not put
Right.
one that has placeholder assets. Like, if you're on a festival, make sure your demo or whatever your build is the best possible version. And the reason why I go on this rant is that I have played games from festivals that are just like, this is the very first version. This is the pre-alpha build of my game, and
Right.
none of the sound works, and we have no options menu, and the gameplay will crash after 20 seconds of starting it. But please wishlist this game. We'll get better, I promise.
Right.
And again, like I put this point out there, like I'm not a normal consumer. Like I'm the guy who would be like, okay, I'll wishlist this. I'll check this out in a year, 2 years from now.
Right.
Most consumers are not doing that. They will, if they look at your game, they go, ugh, or they load it up and immediately crashes. They're out that door. They're never coming back to your game, even if it does massively improve. Because again, like it's another point for people watching this. I've seen games where the first, second version of the game was horrible. Like I tried it, did not like it. And then after, let's say, a year or two, maybe going from, early access to 1.0, it is a far better game. But a lot of consumers will always remember that horrible time they had with their game. They'll remember, this character clipped through the wall and then it soft locked him and I couldn't exit the game. I had to Alt F4. Why would I ever give that game another try again?
Right.
And it is so painful.
Yeah, I think I always prefer if a game studio delays a release versus just trying to rush something out. I feel like the damage is already done. If, like you said, like if your first idea of this game is, it crashing, it looks terrible, like nothing is working how it was advertised as, then it's really hard to come back from that. I feel like there's been plenty of examples of it over time. There are some games that they'll make it work, like No Man's Sky. I feel like was one of those games that like promised a lot at the beginning, and then somehow was able to turn it around after years of development and stuff. But I feel like a lot of games don't get that kind of grace. So you really, like you said, really have to nail it on the first impression, or it's gonna be tough to come back.
Yeah, and it's again one of those troubles for a lot of developers. Like you want to get I'm sure your friend Austin has pointed this out, like it's that kind of double-edged sword of marketing. You want people to know about your game as early as you can, because if they don't know about your game, they're not going to buy it or wishlist or hear anything about it. But if like your very first version of your game is horrible, or if people are not responding to that, you don't want to kind of like give them ammunition to hate your game. You don't want to put that in their heads. And it is a very tough line to walk for a lot of studios. And again, this is a genre by genre, audience by audience basis. Like, and I've said this before, there are some games that I've seen like very first version, almost like this is just a basic core gameplay loop, maybe just like placeholder art, placeholder aesthetics, and it looks so damn good. To give you another example, there's this game we tried the demo to. The name is escaping me right now. BMX action roguelike, where with like heavy metal. So like the whole point is that you're doing tricks while killing demons. That's it. And the GIF was just like the guy going, okay, I'm going to take my bike, I'm going to do a grind, do a trick, shoot a monster. That's it. And everyone's just like, oh my god, I want to play this game. And again, like, people always like to ask about, like, what is the perfect, if I do X, Y, and Z, my game will succeed every time. And unfortunately, there is no perfect thing, because the market is constantly changing. And again, like, for people who watch this, and for anyone new tuning in as well, like, we have played games that are fantastic titles that have less than 50 reviews on Steam. We've
Wow.
played
Yeah.
games that have no review scores on Steam. And I even do like a monthly column for a website looking at all my favorite like hidden gem games. It is incredibly hard, and unfortunately, it's very depressing. We're recording this like right at the beginning of 2024, so we still have another 11 months of talking about how depressing these can get when it
Yeah.
comes to the game industry.
Yeah. It definitely is tough for indie devs, and I think, like the current state of social media has only made it more difficult to get engagement and likes and stuff. I
Yep.
think Twitter used to be a more reliable source for game devs, at least when we started our Twitter back in 2016 when I originally made that first platformer just to try to get any kind of engagement. And even then, I feel like it was a lot easier to kind of reach out to certain communities or like use certain hashtags.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier to kind of grab people's attention. But I feel like the more I don't know, I guess content, the more like I don't know how to describe it necessarily, just like the more garbage I guess that there is, it's harder to kind of sift through that and find stuff that really that people want to look at and engage with. So yeah, it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
And um yeah, even if you have an amazing, like you said, an amazing game and it looks great, it even then it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be super successful. So I think at least so far, me and Austin are kind of we're starting with the bare minimum. Like we're not
Mm-hmm.
expecting anything out of this game. We just want to make a good game, and if people play it and enjoy it, then that's awesome. But just trying to keep expectations realistic to start. I would love to have the next Lethal Company and just blow up and have
Mm-hmm.
a million concurrent players, but it takes time for those kind of things, and you just kind of have to strike lightning in a bottle kind of to
Mm-hmm.
make it really happen.
Yep. And kind of speaking about like being like a first time developer and kind of like the growing pains of that. One thing I always like to ask like developers to come on, what has there been any aspect of game development that you didn't expect it to be difficult for you personally, but it's definitely been something that has been a challenge for you? Or has it been like mostly steady as kind of like first time game dev goes?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been ups and downs as I'm learning a bunch of new stuff. Like I'd say me as a developer now is way faster in implementing stuff than when I first started. When this was basically just me trying to learn how to use the Godot engine as a first project kind of thing, and it kind of snowballed into a fully fledged game. So I think from a development perspective, it's been pretty smooth sailing. And I think that's where I'm most comfortable with. I think doing the 3D modeling and kind of relearning Blender on my own, and I did some stuff in high school, but never like for a game, like doing like the
Mm-hmm.
rigging of characters and like, for example, I'm doing the bear customization. That's all using like Blender blend shapes, so you can like have a shortest arm and a longest arm, whatever. So that's been a challenge in kind of learning that process of like rigging and animating 3D characters. And yeah, I think I always knew the marketing was going to be the hardest part, and constantly or consistently making videos and gifs and doing the correct promo and making sure that we have like a nice image that people see when they first get an impression of Barely Delivered has been definitely the most challenging part, just because I think that's the challenge for most developers. Most of us aren't, you know, extroverted people to start with, and then you kind of throw in the challenge of also trying to make a marketable product. Then it's a difficult one. And luckily, I've got a good partner in this, Austin, who's been really great at
Mm-hmm.
making sure we're hitting certain goals, or like we're posting on certain platforms at certain times and stuff. So that's something I'm still working on, trying to improve on, be more consistent at. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that actually too, because like I said before recording, I noticed that you're pretty consistent on YouTube in terms of like posting content. And what's your kind of philosophy and like I guess your how you go about doing that?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it has just been trying to keep to a schedule, like trying to know what my limits are. Like a part
Yeah.
of me thinks I would like to maybe go to maybe posting like 2 videos a day, but then I realize if I do that on top of all my other work, it's just going to drain what little reserves I have left of energy. So it
Right.
really came down to just trying to get up to a schedule that works the best for me, and then trying to like balance everything around that. Because again, like for people watching this or my fans, you know that I'm not just sitting here on YouTube playing video games all day. I'm writing posts, writing articles, writing my book. I do a lot of talks at like libraries and schools about game design, so a lot of my afternoon is reaching out to people like that. So I'm not. I definitely do not treat YouTube as like it. Like I don't put all my eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
And admittedly, I think that has hurt things because again, if you're not putting 100% into something, then it obviously can't grow the same rate. If I was just to dedicate, 8 to 10 hours a day just doing YouTube and social media, but
Right.
again, it is that kind of, it's a double-edged sword. If I did only do YouTube and it if YouTube doesn't become big, there's no other money coming in. Like it's that
Right.
case of like it would be nice to be able to focus on this, but if it's not at that point where it's sustainable, you have to do something else. And it's the
Right.
same, unfortunately, said of indie dev. Of again, like 2023 has been a year or was a year marked by a lot of layoffs, a lot of people losing their jobs.
Yeah.
And that is going to reverberate out into 2024 and probably even into 2025. And it, again, like I give this talk at libraries a lot to students. I say that this is not. It's at the end of the day, it's still a business. Like if you go into this thing that's going to be all happiness and I just make whatever game I want, and a year later it comes out and I'm rich. It doesn't work that way. And like the new trend I've been having here on the channel is that every one of my design videos, I think I will give at least one indie developer about depression, just because of the hard talks that I have. And
Right.
it is very hard. And for a lot of developers, like if you don't have like, and I've been thinking about this as a topic for one of my videos about how hard it is to understand why a game succeeds or why it doesn't, because you can look at insert whatever big name game is happening right now at the time of for people watching this recording, and a
Yeah.
lot of people have such a horrible time examining what did this game do, because sometimes it comes down to a lot of very specific things that a game does right, and sometimes it just comes down to very dumb luck. You could
Yeah.
post that game on like the right day at the right time when nothing else is happening, and everyone hears about it. And
Right.
yeah, to your point about Twitter, like it has been colossally difficult to reach out to people on social media over the last like 6 to 7 months because everyone's now fragmented.
Yep.
There's no centralized source, and even then, even on being on Twitter, I know that my posts are being pushed away because I'm not verified. I'm not doing that whole thing as well. So it's that issue where you have to rely on social media, but when social media doesn't work, where do you go?
Right.
Again, like
Yeah.
that's not a rhetorical question for anyone watching. It's like, where do you go now when social media doesn't work?
Right. Yeah, and that's something I've been, trying out. Like, we started posting TikTok videos as well, try to see, if we get any engagement in that. I've seen some other developers have luck with that, and like I've, kind of found some niche communities within TikTok itself, which is kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say replaced Twitter, but kind of like supplemented some of the lost, I feel like, feel of community from its fragmentation over the past
Mm-hmm.
year or so. So, um, yeah, it's tough, and kind of to your larger point about how difficult it is to do indie dev, and especially like if you want to do it full time. I feel pretty lucky in terms of that. I don't know. I guess I've always gone into the mindset of like this is a hobby, and then if it becomes something more, then we can really take it to full time indie dev. And I feel pretty lucky with that because I feel like a lot of people don't have that opportunity. The indie dev is kind of the make it or break it for them. If it doesn't work out, then where's the money coming in? So um, I think that I've found a good balance for that. I know that doesn't work for a lot of other people. It is hard to go from like coding for 40 hours a week and then trying to do more coding after hours. So it's definitely had its it's been a struggle at certain times, but I think I found a good balance at this point to where I would be happy if 5 people played Barely Delivered and got decent reviews on it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is tough though, and I think it has to be treated more as like, if I don't know, it depends what your mindset is going in. Like to your point, you are making a product that you're trying to sell to people. So if that is your mindset, then you can have strategic ways of going about that and making a better marketable product that people will buy. But a lot of people, I think, want to, like you said, go in and make their dream game. It's more of an art form, and like they're
Hmm.
trying to express themselves in some way. And if that is kind of the mindset going in, then I don't know if you can really expect, like you said, to just get rich, right off the bat. It's very difficult to kind of find that perfect balance. Like I can only think of a handful of examples that might fall under that kind of small window. So yeah, it is tough to be an indie dev. So yeah, wishing all the indie devs out there best of luck, because I know it can be difficult.
Hmm. Yeah. And with like trying to put everything into the game, that's another challenge. Because again, like for developers watching this, there's always that idea that if I just keep putting more in and more in, that it will get bigger and the game will get better. But one of the things I think we've seen in terms of a major trend in design, especially like the last 7 years, is I think more people like very small, very compartmentalized game designs rather than
Yeah.
just saying, here's 700 hours of every single idea I've ever came up with and put into a game. There are
Right.
people who do like massive games, but it's become, I think, more important to say, can I deliver 5 minutes of perfection? Can
Right.
this game be super fantastic and enjoyable for 5 minutes? And if I can do that, then I can make another 5 minutes, and then another,
Yeah.
and like even with like indie trends, I think that's another very subtle aspect of what made Vampire Survivors blow up in 2022. This idea of here's this just 30 minutes of eye candy graphics porn of explosions and effects, and you can get all the music, and your character just nukes the screen, and it's
Right.
30 minutes long. Like, we don't need to worry about this being a 5 hour long run or a 17-hour run. It's literally 30 minutes of your time. And I think for a lot of developers, both new and even some of the veteran ones, they tend to struggle with this idea of what is like the perfect, gameplay loop of my game look like? What does it look like for a 2 minute play, a 5 minute play, a 10 minute play, whatever, that is absolutely perfect, like the perfect baseline, everyone's enjoying it? Because if you can't answer that question, then you're really leaving it up to chance, or people
Right.
are just not going to respond. Because I've seen, again, like for anyone new watching this, you're talking to someone who has played thousands of indie games at this point. I have seen games where the developer's whole point is it's going to be bad for like the first 5 to 10 hours, but then it gets good. You just have to get to hour
Yeah.
15. And
Right.
most people are never going to do that.
Yeah.
And, yep.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's something I've definitely worked towards with, or tried to at least with Barely Delivered, is really keep the scope to a minimum. Like, I think just having the core idea of like you deliver packages and you try to, navigate this one neighborhood for this run, then that and make that as perfect as it can be, then that is the goal, I think, for this
Mhm,
game. So and then all the other stuff is just kind of like the icing on the cake. Like it just kind of keeps people more engaged, or like kind of makes it
mhm,
a little more fun, or like gives it some more replay value. But like you said, if I can make that little 10-minute snippet perfect in terms of like the, running around the neighborhood and it feels awesome to deliver packages, then that's kind of the
mhm,
goal. And yeah, I think, trimming scope and like really starting with a core idea is really fundamental. Like some of my favorite games are ones I only played for like a few hours. Like
mhm,
Firewatch is one that comes to mind. It's only like a 3 to 4 hour playthrough, but It's a really impactful story and like really beautiful game to kind of walk through and stuff. So I think, yeah, you don't like if you're a solo dev out there, you don't have to make the next like Skyrim or whatever, big open world RPG. I know that's what everyone wants to do when they first become a game dev, but you can do that, but just on a smaller scale. Just start with like a tiny little version of that, and then you can always expand.
Mm-hmm. And again, like part of, and I'm sure there's something that Austin has brought up for you as well. Like part of growing as an indie developer is being able to get a portfolio of games out there. Because not only
Right.
does this improve your own skill at being a game dev, but it's also how you build kind of your footprint online.
Yeah,
Nobody is going to
definitely.
care like what your name is on your very first game. And again, like
Right.
one of the most common advices to any developer, especially when it comes with a trailer, is that if you're a first-time developer, don't put your company logo as the first thing on your trailer because who's going to know who you are if you've literally never made a game before?
Right.
But as you build that reputation, this is how we get to see like more interesting and more experimental games. Once you kind of gotten the game dev process down. And again, like as a first time developer, I'm sure it has been a challenge trying to learn, okay, how do I want to build this game? At the same time, how do I use Godot to build this game?
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's something that's getting better with time for
Yep.
sure. As I get better with Godot, like it's a lot easier to be like, okay, these are the tools I need to do this feature. I know exactly kind of in my head what that's going to look like. But yeah, to your point about building a portfolio, like I've already got like another list of like all these other ideas I've got for games, but I think going through the full process of releasing a game, putting it out there, getting feedback, even if I got like 100 negative reviews on Steam, I still would find value in that and like what went wrong here at least. So
Mm-hmm.
like I would like any kind of feedback is what I'm looking for and trying to like perfect the game development loop. When me and my friend in high school made that first 2D platformer, you couldn't. That was at the time when you had to go through the Steam greenlight process. So when we did that, we just got torn apart by the greenlight community, just being like, "This game looks like trash," like just put it on something else. This doesn't belong on Steam, which at the time was really hurtful. But in hindsight, I can kind of see what they were looking at, from an outside
Mm-hmm.
perspective. But I think, yeah, like just put it out there. Just try to, like don't rush it necessarily, but I don't think people should be afraid to like hear the negative criticism. You can separate yourself if you can separate yourself from your
Mm-hmm.
game, then that can be really helpful in terms of growing as an indie dev.
Yep, because if there's one thing the general consumer is good at, is pointing out very harsh truths about
Yeah.
any game they see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think yeah, I honestly I think as this being my first game, just any kind of feedback or any kind of like, good or bad, I'll be happy with at the end of the day because ultimately I just want this to grow as like a indie dev operation or, maybe it becomes a full-time thing in the future, who knows,
Mm-hmm.
but um yeah, just kind of getting better at the process is what my goal is with this game.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that is a good goal to have. Because again, like if you're for any developer watching this, the chance that your game's gonna be the next No Man's Sky or the next Pal World Vampire Survivors or pick any major hit is very minuscule. And more importantly, and this is something that again, like I could rant for the next 2 hours about. Like long-term stability in the game industry is incredibly difficult. Whether you have had, hit after hit of your company, or if you've been just struggling to make by with each one of your games. And part of that challenge is how do you keep growing as a developer? How do you keep improving from game 1 to game 2 to 5, 10, 30? And to your point earlier about how a lot of developers treat this purely from the art point, a lot of people don't think about what is going to be the fifth game I'm going to be making. What is going to be
Right.
the 20th game? I think I just gave about 5 heart attacks to developers when I just said think about 20 games you're going to make over the next few years.
Yeah.
But it is unfortunately like that. It's where we get to like the business side, and I
Right.
guess like as a question to you again, as a solo and first time developer, the business side of game dev is one of the things I see a lot of developers either they get it right away, like they're already thinking about this before they even start making their first game, or they don't think about it at all. Like
Yeah.
they're just like, wait, when do I do marketing? Or I'll just reach out to influencers, a day before my game is out. And I just
Right.
gave every PR person a heart attack again with that
Right.
point. So for you, like, how has it been, I guess, understanding the business side of what goes
Yeah.
into making a game?
Yeah. I think I have a at least a little bit of a background in like kind of entrepreneurship and like at least from my like college experience, like I got a certificate in entrepreneurship. So I kind of have an idea of like, at least the fundamentals of like what you do to run a business and how do you make a profitable like product and stuff. Now in terms of like actually implementing that, that's where it becomes difficult, and it is hard to think about it from like a business perspective, especially since a lot of us like treat it like a hobby or like
Mm-hmm.
we mentioned like an kind of a form of art. So finding a way to I don't know. It's kind of always been in the back of my head because I'm on Twitter. I see what indie devs talking about how important marketing is. It's kind of got to be the first step. Like you want to do as soon as possible. Like I don't think
Mm-hmm.
barely delivered right now is in any like releasable state. Like it definitely needs a lot more work. But we are trying our best to show what is ready and like get that out as soon as possible, because like you said, you have to try and build that audience as quick as you can, but also not like you don't want to just rush your game out immediately with when it's not ready. So we've been trying to find that balance of like, is this does this gameplay look like what it's going to look like at the end versus this still needs refinement, we should wait to advertise this. But it's all kind of like we're throwing darts at the dartboard and seeing what sticks, what works. And yeah, just kind of try to put yourself out there and see what works, I guess would be my advice for any indie devs out there in terms of marketing. And don't be afraid to kind of show off your game even in the early stages.
Yep. And again, like being able to get the point of your game across. I would say like the best time to start doing marketing is again when you can show something fantastic about your game. Whether
Right.
it is again a crazy GIF, if you can have everything functioning exactly how you want. And definitely, I would say marketing is something you really want to look at once you have your aesthetics nailed. Because
Right.
again, like the very worst thing you can do is show off your game with 100% placeholder art. That everything is
Right.
temporary. It looks like again, like it looks like you just took assets off of whatever engine story went on, put them
Right.
in, and then they said done. This is my
Right.
game. Because again, people will remember this
Right.
and they will not give your game a second chance. And it's an unfortunate truth. Again, as I say, like for any developers watching this, if you're looking for someone to play your game, no matter what it looks like, no matter where it's at, I am that kind of guy. But I am not the general consumer. Like, do not
Right.
take my opinion as this is what everyone else is going to think about your
Right.
game.
Yeah, I think yeah. I guess when I'm saying like put stuff out early, like I've been doing it within kind of the game dev sphere of like
Yep.
Twitter and like I post a couple of times in the Godot subreddit like, hey, this is a cool thing I did, and that seems to get a lot of attention. Like, so just knowing your audience and what if you're trying to, market to the general audience, then that's definitely when you want your most polished, like this is what the game's going to look like, your most action packed, like 10 to 15 seconds. But there is a lot of value too in kind of showing the process with other indie devs, and that seems to, it just kind of depends on who you're trying to market to. So yeah, I don't think there's any harm in like necessarily getting your name out there. Just make sure that, like you said, you don't want to use placeholder assets. You want to be showing something that you think is representative of what the final product's going to be.
Mm-hmm. And again, for a lot of developers out there, that can be very hard to nail down, especially when you're
Yeah.
just still kind of iterating and making sure what your game is. But it is very much that case. Like, once you've officially started marketing your game, it's kind of locked in at that point. Because you
Yeah.
don't want to market your game and realize, oh, 2 months later, I want to build a completely different game, or I want to add something
Right.
completely new. And again, like, I joke about that, but I've seen developers who have done just that. That it becomes that case of, I'm just going to keep adding more and more in, or, people liked it as a 2D platform. Let me turn it into a 3D platformer. Which, again,
Yeah.
there's a good litmus test for your knowledge of game dev. If what I just said just gave you a huge migraine, then you are ready to start learning game dev.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Well, I know we're about an hour in. I think we can start to wrap things up if that works for you, Justin. But
Yeah,
I guess
totally.
anything else regarding the development of Barely Deliver that we didn't touch on, music, art, production, development, anything like that.
Yeah. I think I've kind of gone into this with like, since it is a hobby, going with like the $0 budget approach so far.
Mhm.
Like the only thing I've spent on is the really awesome box art that I got somebody to commission to do, which um yeah, so like that has kind of been the only thing I've paid for so far. Godot is completely free, open source.
Mhm.
And I think you can, like, if you're an indie dev out there and you're just trying to start out doing this, you don't have to like sink a bunch of money into this to do it. Like every tool I use is pretty much free. Like Blender's free, Godot's also open source and free. I use like the
Mhm.
free version of Figma for a lot of the like 2D texturing and stuff just to like kind of get something on the page. So yeah, like you don't have to pay for a ton of like, I know a lot of people use like something like the Adobe suite or like pay for maybe the pro version of Unity or something, but if you're just starting out, just do what is easiest, and you don't have to really like sink a ton of money into
Mhm.
game dev to really get started.
Yep.
The tools are out there, and the barrier of entry has never been lower. So yeah.
And that's the good news. The bad news has just gotten a lot harder to actually get your game to a point where it is like a marketable product. And
Right. Yeah.
that is unfortunately the nightmare for any developer, regardless of their background or the size of their studio. Um,
Yeah.
I guess as a kind of like a quick follow up question for you regarding like Godot, any like useful resources out there that you would like to mention in terms of learning Godot, or anything that you use in terms of just like kind of like getting like off the ground in terms of
Yeah.
game dev?
Yeah, there's a ton of great resources now since Godot's kind of rise in popularity. Like if you go to their subreddit or Discord, are awesome resources. There's a website called Made with Godot, I believe that, or maybe that's just their Twitter handle, that shows kind of what is possible with Godot. There's a couple different sites for like, I use one called Godot Shaders. That's like all like you just search for any kind of like shader you're looking for in the game. So like I use this like a bubble effect in Barely Delivered that's heavily based off of this one that I found that's completely free, open source, and there's a lot of great tutorials out there. So yeah, I highly recommend, if you're interested in Godot, joining the community and just kind of seeing what other people are doing, and ask questions, and there will be people there to help.
All right. So with that said, before we kind of go into like our my final set of questions for you, anything else regarding Barely Delivered you want to discuss?
If you're interested, we're hoping to release sometime within the next few months. That's all coming soon, but hopefully by 2024 is the hard deadline. So yeah, check it out. We're on we've got Big Seat Studios on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, bigseatstudios.com, wherever you can find us. So yeah.
All right. And are you planning on doing any with like any other platform besides Steam, or is it just going to be on like Steam? I assume or is it going to be on Itch as well?
I think I want to still release it on itch. I have a kind of a beta testing site that I was using there where I was putting like beta builds on there for people to test out. But yeah, I think itch will be on there. I think eventually I'd love to get it on to the Nintendo Switch platform, but there's a little more involved with that than just making a PC export for it.
Yeah.
So that luckily there are, I think this is kind of still in the works, but Godot is working on making some Switch ports, which is awesome. So I'm hoping some time down the line after the PC release, maybe we'll get it on the Switch store. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. And anything you want, like anything you mentioned in terms of social media, I'll make sure to include that in the description down below for people watching. Other than that, I guess any final thoughts, any final points about Barely Delivered, starting out game dev, just anything to end our discussion on.
Um, I I just wanted to say thanks for having me on. I appreciate talking to you. Appreciate your insight on a lot of the indie dev stuff going on right now. And just kind of picking your brain a little bit. So yeah, appreciate the time.
Not a
It's been great.
problem. All right, and yeah, if you are interested in the future and would like to come on and talk more about kind of like how the game did, thoughts on whatever you're going to do next, definitely feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to have you back.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate it.
All right. So, with that said, everyone, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Perceptive Podcast. Again, if you are a developer working on a current or recent release game or just want to talk shop, I am always looking for guests to do these shows live, recorded, whatever. Just feel free to reach out to me on social medias, emails, Discord, whatever. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, do the YouTubing stuff. Check out all the Discords and the Patreons. Buy all the copies of my books if you would like. Be sure to check out Barely Delivered. Again, you'll find links to everything down below. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. So again, Justin, thank you so much for hanging out with me. We're starting to warm up, at least around here, weather season here at the end of January. And definitely best of luck with finishing Barely Delivered.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been great.
All right. So with that said, everyone, once again, have a great rest of your night and see you next time.